The Intergalactic Harmony exhibition had been planned for 17 standard cycles, which was roughly equivalent to asking a bureaucrat to organize a birthday party in geological time. Every detail had been scrutinized, analyzed, and debated by committees that spawned subcommittees, which in turn birthed working groups that would make corporate middle management weep with envy. The result was what the galaxy's finest minds considered the pinnacle of diplomatic achievement, a celebration where every species would bring something harmless to demonstrate their commitment to peaceful coexistence. Because nothing says we're not going to murder each other quite like a show-and-tell session with cosmic implications. Supreme Arch stood at the center of the exhibition hall, their crystalline form refracting the ambient light into patterns that would have driven human artists to either madness or masterpiece creation. As the appointed leader of this magnificent exercise in bureaucratic optimism, they had spent the better part of 3 cycles ensuring every possible contingency had been addressed. Every species had been briefed, every safety protocol implemented, every emergency procedure rehearsed until even the most paranoid security chiefs nodded their approval. The hall itself was a marvel of engineering that screamed, "We have too much money and not enough sense." Spanning roughly the size of a small moon, it featured climate zones for every known atmospheric preference, gravity fields that could be adjusted on the fly, and enough backup power to run a small star system. The architects had clearly subscribed to the "if we build it big enough, surely nothing can go wrong" school of design. Counselor Bex glided through her designated section with the serene confidence of someone who had never encountered a genuine surprise in her life. Her species, the Meloians, had evolved on a world where the most dangerous predator was essentially a carnivorous flower that moved at the speed of continental drift. She supervised the arrangement of her contribution to the exhibition, a collection of what could only be described as living stuffed animals. These creatures, called flufflings, existed in a perpetual state of contentment that made meditation masters seem agitated by comparison. "Perfect," she murmured, watching as a fluffling rolled onto its back and began purring a sound that could cure depression in 3 different species. Absolutely perfect. Minister Wall clicked his mandibles in what passed for satisfaction among the Chitinari. His insectoid form moved with mechanical precision as he inspected his species' contribution, the harmonic crystals. These remarkable specimens had the ability to produce soothing melodies when exposed to ambient electromagnetic fields, essentially turning any room into a cosmic spa. The fact that they also happened to be completely inorganic and therefore incapable of biting, stinging, or otherwise causing mayhem made them ideal for an event dedicated to demonstrating harmlessness. "Acceptable parameters achieved," he announced to nobody in particular, because Chitinari had never quite grasped the concept of small talk. Ambassador Hui flowed through her aquatic section with liquid grace, her translucent form rippling with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed emotional states her species had been perfecting for millennia. The Aquarians had brought what they called dream jellies, ethereal creatures that floated through specially designed atmospheric pockets, creating light displays that could induce states of profound peace in most sentient beings. The jellies had no nervous system to speak of, no digestive tract, and about as much aggressive potential as a particularly lazy cloud. Representative Ox stood motionless in his corner, which was less remarkable when one considered that his species measured time in geological epochs and considered rapid movement to be anything faster than erosion. The silicates had contributed what they called harmony stones, crystalline formations that absorbed negative emotions and converted them into barely perceptible light shows. They were essentially the galaxy's most overqualified mood rings. The pattern was clear, predictable, and reassuring in the way that only comes from exhaustive committee planning. Every species had brought something that couldn't possibly cause harm to a particularly delicate flower, let alone a sentient being. Attendant Pym bustled between the various sections, her nervous energy creating small eddies in the carefully controlled atmospheric systems. She carried a datapad that contained enough contingency plans to stock a paranoia convention, each one meticulously crafted to address every conceivable scenario. Her species, the Flitterites, had evolved anxiety into an art form, which made them excellent at anticipating problems and terrible at relaxing. "Status report," she chirped to Security Chief Nex, who stood at his post like a monument to professional competence. "All harmless specimens accounted for," Nex replied in the tone of someone who had spent his career preparing for emergencies that never materialized. "Flufflings are fluffy, crystals are crystalline, jellies are jelly-like. The stones haven't moved, which is apparently normal for stones." "Excellent," Pym said, checking off another item on her endless list. "And the human delegation." Here, the conversation took on the particular quality that discussions of humans tended to acquire throughout the galaxy, a mixture of fascination, bewilderment, and the kind of caution normally reserved for handling unstable explosives. Humanity had only recently joined the galactic community, and their reputation preceded them like a sonic boom in a library. They were the species that had somehow convinced their planet's apex predators to live in their homes. They were the beings who had looked at creatures designed by evolution to be perfect, killing machines, and decided they would make excellent companions for their offspring. They had turned wolves into chihuahuas, which was either the greatest triumph of genetic manipulation or the most elaborate practical joke in evolutionary history. "The humans are..." Nex consulted his own device. 15 minutes from arrival. Ambassador Hazel confirmed they understand the exhibition parameters. "Harmless specimens only," Pym repeated, as if saying it enough times would somehow make it more enforceable. "Harmless specimens only," Nex agreed, though his tone suggested he was the kind of being who believed in preparing for the impossible. Supreme Arch's crystalline form shifted slightly, which in their species was equivalent to a satisfied nod. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The galaxy's most peaceful species had brought the galaxy's most harmless creatures to demonstrate their commitment to harmony. It was a diplomatic masterstroke that would be studied in xenopolitical science courses for generations. The exhibition hall hummed with anticipation and carefully regulated atmospheric recycling systems. Recorder flux positioned themselves to document what was certain to be a textbook example of successful interspecies cooperation. The various harmless creatures continued their harmless activities. The flufflings fluffed, the crystals harmonized, the jellies dreamed their peaceful dreams, and the stones maintained their commitment to geological immobility. It was, by every measurable standard, a perfect setup for a perfectly peaceful event, which should have been everyone's first clue that something was about to go spectacularly wrong. The transport bay announcement echoed through the hall with the kind of cheerful efficiency that made bureaucrats everywhere feel validated in their life choices. "Attention, human delegation arriving at Bay 7. Repeat, human delegation arriving at Bay 7. Supreme Arch's form brightened with anticipation. After cycles of planning, the moment had finally arrived. They would welcome humanity to their first intergalactic harmony exhibition, witness their contribution to galactic peace, and add another success story to the archives of diplomatic achievement. The bay doors began their slow, ceremonial opening. Because in galactic politics, even doorways had to make a statement. Through the widening gap, the first glimpses of the human delegation became visible. Ambassador Hazel in her formal diplomatic attire, Dr. Mitchell with his xenobiological equipment, and Captain Nora maintaining the kind of alert posture that suggested she was prepared for anything. Behind them, barely visible in the transport's shadows, came the soft sound of children's laughter and something else, a sound that made several of the more perceptive aliens pause in their preparations. It was a low, rumbling noise that seemed oddly familiar, though none of them could quite place where they had heard it before. Supreme Arch's crystalline structure began to resonate with the harmonic frequency of diplomatic satisfaction. The humans had arrived, they had followed protocol, and they were about to witness the galaxy's most elaborate demonstration of harmlessness. The irony was so thick it could have been measured with scientific instruments. The first hint that the Intergalactic Harmony exhibition was about to become significantly less harmonious came in the form of 6-year-old Echo, who stepped through the transport bay doors with the kind of quiet confidence that should have immediately triggered every survival instinct in the hall. She was holding what appeared to be a leash, though calling it a leash was rather like calling a supernova a nightlight. Technically accurate, but missing several crucial details. At the other end of said leash padded a creature that made every alien in the vicinity experience the sudden and overwhelming urge to reassess their life choices. It was roughly the size of a small vehicle, covered in orange and black stripes that seemed to pulse with barely contained energy, and possessed the kind of casual grace that spoke of millions of years of evolutionary refinement in the art of making other things very, very dead. Echo beamed with the innocent pride of a child showing off her favorite toy. "This is Whiskers," she announced to the suddenly silent hall. "He's a tiger cub, and he's super friendly." Supreme Arch's crystalline form went through a color spectrum that their species typically reserved for moments of existential crisis. Several smaller fragments of their being actually detached and clattered to the floor, which was the crystalline equivalent of fainting. But Echo was just the opening act. Phoenix emerged next, walking with the kind of matter-of-fact confidence that 8-year-old boys wielded like a superpower. Beside him loped something that made Whiskers look like a particularly large house cat. The creature stood nearly as tall as Phoenix himself, with a coat of silver and black that seemed to absorb light, eyes that held an intelligence both ancient and wild, and teeth that could have doubled as industrial cutting equipment. "This is Shadow," Phoenix announced, giving the massive wolf cub an affectionate scratch behind the ears that would have required a significant amount of courage from most adults. "He's still a baby, so he's super harmless. Watch this. Shadow, sit." The wolf cub promptly sat, tail wagging with enough force to knock over small furniture. Phoenix beamed with pride. "See? Totally harmless." Minister Wool's mandibles began clicking in a rapid staccato pattern that was either deep contemplation or the Chitnari equivalent of hyperventilation. His carefully ordered worldview, built on logical frameworks and predictable outcomes, was experiencing what could generously be called a significant software malfunction. Melody skipped into view next, her 7-year-old form practically radiating joy as she led what could only be described as a small dragon. The creature was roughly the size of a large dog, with scales that shifted between deep emerald and midnight black, wings that were still developing but already showed impressive span, and a general demeanor that suggested it considered fire to be a reasonable solution to most problems. "Everyone, meet Ember," Melody announced with the kind of enthusiasm typically reserved for ice cream announcements. "She's a baby dragon, and she only breathes a little bit of fire. Want to see?" "No!" came the unanimous response from every alien in the hall, delivered with the kind of fervor usually reserved for religious experiences or natural disaster warnings. Counselor Bex had gone completely rigid, which in a species known for their flowing grace was roughly equivalent to a human turning to stone. Her flufflings, sensing the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure and the presence of creatures that viewed them as potential snacks, had ceased their perpetual purring and were now huddled together in what could only be described as a furry ball of terror. But the parade of impossibility was far from over. Blaze bounded through the doors with the infectious enthusiasm of a 9-year-old who had never met a stranger or encountered a situation that couldn't be improved with more volume. Behind him came something that defied several laws of physics and at least 3 conventions of common sense. It was massive even by cub standards, with a coat of pristine white that seemed to glow with its own inner light, paws the size of dinner plates, and a general presence that suggested it was accustomed to being the apex predator in any environment it chose to grace. "This is Snowball," Blaze announced at a volume that could have been heard in the next star system. "She's a polar bear cub, and she loves hugs. Mom says she might get a little bigger when she grows up, but right now she's perfectly sized for snuggling." Ambassador Hui's bioluminescent patterns had shifted to colors that didn't appear in any known spectrum of peaceful emotions. Her dream jellies, faced with predators that existed entirely outside their evolutionary experience, had apparently decided that the safest course of action was to become considerably less dreamy and significantly more jelly-like, essentially liquefying in their containment fields. Storm entered with the quiet dignity of an 8-year-old who took his responsibilities seriously. His companion was perhaps the most unsettling of all, not because of its size, though it was certainly impressive, but because of the way it moved. The great white shark pup floated in its portable aquatic environment with the kind of effortless grace that spoke of perfect predatory design. Every movement was economical, purposeful, and suggested that it viewed the world primarily in terms of what might or might not be edible. "This is Finn," Storm said with the solemnity of someone introducing a head of state. "He's still learning to hunt, so he's totally safe. Plus, his tank has really good filters." Representative Ox, whose species had survived for millions of years by the simple expedient of being too boring for predators to notice, was experiencing the geological equivalent of panic. His harmony stones had apparently decided that the current emotional atmosphere was beyond their capacity to harmonize, and had begun emitting a low-frequency hum that sounded distinctly like screaming. Nova arrived last, bringing with her the kind of cheerful energy that could power small cities. Her companion was perhaps the most deceptively innocent-looking of the bunch, a small, spotted feline that moved with liquid grace and possessed eyes that held the kind of ancient intelligence that made philosophers uncomfortable. "Say hello to Spots," Nova announced, as if introducing the galaxy's most adorable creature. "She's a baby leopard, and she loves to play. Sometimes she brings me presents, but Mom says I shouldn't accept dead birds at the breakfast table." The silence that followed this introduction was the kind of profound quiet that typically preceded either enlightenment or catastrophe. It was broken only by the sound of Attendant Pym's datapad clattering to the floor, as her nervous system finally accepted that her worst nightmares had been insufficiently imaginative. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward with the calm confidence of someone who had apparently missed the part where bringing apex predator cubs to a harmony exhibition might be considered problematic. "As you can see," he began in the tone of someone delivering a perfectly reasonable scientific presentation, "we've brought a representative sample of Earth's younger predatory species. They're all quite harmless at this stage of development." Security Chief Nex had gone through his entire arsenal of emergency procedures and was now operating in the kind of improvisational territory that most security manuals specifically advised against. His hand hovered over alert buttons that he was fairly certain had never been designed for this particular scenario. "When you said harmless," Supreme Arch managed to articulate, their voice creating harmonic frequencies that suggested deep structural instability, "we assumed you understood the conventional definition of the term." Ambassador Hazel looked genuinely puzzled, which somehow made the entire situation exponentially more terrifying. "These are harmless," she insisted with the kind of earnest conviction that made reasonable beings question the nature of reality. "They're babies. They can't even hunt properly yet." Phoenix nodded enthusiastically. "Shadow still trips over his own paws sometimes." "It's super cute." Echo chimed in helpfully. "Whiskers thinks everything is a toy. Yesterday he played with a tree branch for 3 hours. Melody added, Ember only accidentally sets things on fire maybe once a week now. She's getting much better at controlling her flame sacks." The various alien dignitaries exchanged the kind of looks typically reserved for moments when the fundamental nature of the universe revealed itself to be significantly more absurd than previously suspected. Their harmless specimens, the creatures they had carefully selected for their complete inability to cause harm, suddenly seemed woefully inadequate for an exhibition that now featured what appeared to be a sampling of Earth's most efficient killing machines in miniature form. Recorder Flux, whose job it was to document this historic moment of interspecies harmony, found themselves in the unprecedented position of recording what might be either the greatest diplomatic disaster in galactic history or the most elaborate practical joke ever perpetrated on a cosmic scale. The children, meanwhile, continued to beam with pride at their beloved companions, completely oblivious to the fact that they had just redefined the concept of harmless in ways that would require revision of several interstellar treaties. "Would you like to pet them?" Nova asked brightly, as Spots began to purr with a sound that vibrated through the floor plating. They love meeting new friends. The collective response from the alien delegation was a silence so profound it could have been measured in astronomical units. Ambassador Hazel, with the serene confidence of someone who had clearly never experienced a moment of self-doubt in her diplomatic career, stepped forward to address what she apparently perceived as a minor misunderstanding rather than a full-scale existential crisis for every non-human in the room. "I can see there might be some confusion," she began, employing the kind of diplomatic understatement that could describe a supernova as slightly warm. "Allow me to clarify why these specimens are perfectly appropriate for a harmony exhibition." Supreme Arch's crystalline form was now cycling through colors that didn't exist in any known spectrum of calm emotions. "Please," they managed, "enlighten us." "Well," Hazel continued with academic enthusiasm, "the key factor here is developmental stage. These cubs are all pre-hunting age, which means their predatory instincts are still largely dormant. They're essentially in their extended socialization period." Dr. Mitchell nodded eagerly, apparently delighted to have found an audience for what was clearly his favorite lecture topic. "The human-predator bonding process begins during this crucial developmental window. You see, we've essentially hijacked their imprinting mechanisms." Minister Wool's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely, which in Chitanari body language roughly translated to system failure imminent. "You've hijacked predator imprinting?" "Oh, yes, Doctor." Mitchell beamed with the pride of someone discussing a particularly clever scientific breakthrough. "It's quite remarkable, really. By exposing these cubs to human contact during their neuroplasticity phase, we've essentially convinced them that humans are part of their pack structure." Phoenix helpfully demonstrated by giving Shadow a belly rub that would have required significant courage from most galactic diplomats. The massive wolf cub's tail wagged with enough force to register on seismic equipment. "See," Phoenix said, "he thinks I'm his big brother." "Well, little brother, he's already bigger than me, but he doesn't know that." Counselor Bex found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "And this bonding, it makes them safe." "Safe-ish," Echo corrected helpfully. "Whiskers still has really big teeth, but he only uses them for playing. Most of the time." "Most of the time?" Representative Ox repeated, his geological composure finally showing cracks. "Well," Melody chimed in with the kind of brutal honesty that only children could deliver, "sometimes Ember gets excited and accidentally melts things, but she always looks sorry afterward." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Ember chose that moment to hiccup, producing a small puff of flame that singed the air roughly 3 feet from Ambassador Hui's position. The Aquarian's bioluminescent patterns immediately shifted to what could only be described as luminous terror. "That's just baby fire," Nova explained reassuringly. "When she grows up, her flames will be much bigger and hotter. Mom says she might be able to melt steel someday." Captain Nora, who had been maintaining professional silence throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. "Perhaps we should mention the behavioral modification protocols." "Ah, yes, Doctor," Mitchell said, as if remembering an important footnote. "We've implemented comprehensive training regimens. These cubs have been socialized from birth to recognize humans as pack leaders, food providers, and general non-prey entities." "Non-prey entities," Attendant Pym repeated faintly, as if testing the phrase for structural integrity. "Exactly," Ambassador Hazel confirmed. "The statistics are quite encouraging. Predator-human incidents have decreased by over 90% since we began implementing early socialization protocols." 90%, Security Chief Nex said slowly. "That implies there's still a 10% incident rate, Doctor." Mitchell finished cheerfully. "Mostly minor mishaps. The occasional furniture destruction, some property damage, a few emergency room visits. Nothing that couldn't be handled with proper medical intervention. Storm looked up from where he was checking Finn's tank filtration system. Remember when Finn accidentally bit that veterinarian? But it was only a little bite. A little bite from a great white shark, Supreme Arch managed to articulate. A baby great white shark, Storm corrected seriously. His teeth aren't fully developed yet. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of various alien nervous systems attempting to process information that challenged several fundamental assumptions about the nature of intelligent life in the universe. Supreme Arch had reached the point in their crystalline existence where they were seriously considering whether voluntary structural collapse might be preferable to continuing this conversation. The emergency council session they had called was proceeding with all the efficiency of a bureaucratic nightmare, wrapped in a diplomatic crisis and seasoned with existential dread. So let me understand this correctly, Minister Wall clicked, his mandibles moving in patterns that suggested his logical processing centers were operating at approximately 12% capacity. The humans have brought what they consider harmless specimens, which are actually the juvenile forms of their planet's apex predators. That appears to be an accurate assessment, Representative Ox confirmed, with the kind of resigned acceptance that came from experiencing geological timescales and therefore being unsurprised by absurdity. And they've done this because they genuinely believe that creatures capable of dismembering an adult in 17 different ways are rendered harmless by virtue of being young and emotionally attached to human children, Counselor Bex added, her normally serene demeanor having evolved into something resembling shell shock. The logic is unprecedented, Ambassador Hui managed, her bioluminescent patterns now cycling through colors that marine biologists would classify as deep ocean terror. Attendant Pym, who had spent the better part of an hour updating emergency protocols that had never been designed for this scenario, looked up from her data pad with the expression of someone whose worst nightmares had proven insufficiently creative. The real question is, what do we do now? Security Chief Nex, who had been running threat assessments that kept returning results like error parameters outside known reality, cleared his throat. I've been thinking about that. And I keep coming back to a rather disturbing realization. Which is, Supreme Arch prompted, though their tone suggested they weren't entirely certain they wanted to know. Well, Nex said slowly, if these are the creatures that humans consider harmless enough to bring to a peaceful exhibition, what exactly constitutes dangerous on their planet? The silence that followed this observation was the kind of profound quiet that typically preceded either enlightenment or the heat death of the universe. Oh dear, Counselor Bex whispered. Recorder Flux, who had been documenting the proceedings, made an observation that would alter everything. I've been reviewing the submissions, Flux said carefully. The flufflings supplement their herbivore diet with protein sources, small vertebrates when nutrients are scarce. Counselor Bex shifted uncomfortably. The harmonic crystals grow by absorbing calcium from bone, living bone, forming symbiotic relationships until the host achieves mineral transcendence. Flux continued. The dream jellies secrete psychoactive compounds that can cause permanent neurological damage in sufficient concentration, Ambassador Hui admitted reluctantly. And the harmony stones feed on bioelectric fields from neural activity, causing what we call profound peace, but might be better described as gradual lobotomization, Representative Ox concluded quietly. The realization settled over them like discovering their understanding of reality was fundamentally flawed. So, Phoenix's voice piped up from the gallery where the humans had been patiently waiting. Does this mean we win the harmony contest? Shadow wagged his tail aggressively enough to rattle nearby equipment, apparently sensing that something positive was happening, even if he couldn't understand the specifics. Supreme Arch's crystalline form cycled through every color in their emotional spectrum before settling on something that might charitably be called amused resignation. It appears, they announced to the galaxy at large, that humans have accidentally demonstrated the most important principle of universal harmony. Everyone's definition of harmless is relative, and absolutely nothing in the universe is as simple as it appears to be. The Intergalactic Harmony exhibition was declared a resounding success, though the definition of success had been significantly revised during the proceedings.